Welcome to the April 28th, 2021 City Council Workshop. Roll call, please.
Mayor Sanchez.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Keim. Here. Councilmember Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Weiss. Here. And Councilmember Rodriguez is absent.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and again, welcome to this workshop. Item number 1 is the South Morro
Madam Mayor,
Hills.
I need to do the meeting advisory.
Oh, right. Thank you.
We do have a meeting advisory for this workshop. We are excited to offer public participation in person at meetings again. Please bear in mind that the council chambers are open with a limited capacity as per the state's guidelines. We will ensure that all persons who wish to speak on an agenda item will be given an opportunity to speak. The clerk will call speakers by name so that you will know when it is your turn. We respectfully request that you exit the chambers once you are finished commenting on your item to assist us in maintaining capacity restrictions. Please follow the guiding path to enter and exit the meeting. If you require assistance, please let a staff person know. If you are on Zoom, the deadline to register to speak on Zoom was 1 o'clock today. We are unable to make any exceptions. If you are here in person and wish to speak on an agenda item, you must register to speak on that agenda item before we start calling the public up to speak. Once we start calling the public up to speak, you will be unable to register to speak on that item. And of course, once we vote on that item and we move on, we can't go back to that item to open up the public comment again. So just a little advisory there. And Madam Mayor, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mr. Novato. And we do have a workshop on one item, and that's number 1, South Morro Hills Community Plan Draft Framework. And I do want to state on the record that Councilmember Christopher Rodriguez previously has registered his conflict of interest with respect to this, and that is why he is not here today. So I want to thank Councilmember Rodriguez for letting us know so we can proceed. And on this item, we do have beginning comments by Jonathan Borrego.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members. It's a pleasure being here this afternoon. In November 2019, staff received council direction to prepare a community plan for the South Morro Hills area. A community plan is a planning document that establishes a future land use vision and implementing regulations for a defined area, which in this case is the 2,500-acre South Morro Hills community. The overarching goal of this community plan is to preserve agricultural operations in the area while providing additional incentives for the area's farming interests to continue farming. These incentives include the introduction of Tier 2 agritourism uses and providing for a level of additional residential development in exchange for property owners agreeing to the future preservation of farmland. It's important to draw a distinction between preserving farmland and preserving farming. Farmland without farming is not the goal here, which is why the incentives that I mentioned earlier and that you'll hear more about this afternoon are important to the plan. This afternoon, staff will be presenting the draft framework that has been prepared for a future South Morro Hills community plan. This is not the finished product. The actual community plan would be presented to the council as well as the Planning Commission at a later date. The document being presented this evening is intended to set the policy framework that will inform that future community plan. Before I turn the presentation over to Rob Dimohowski, who's the project manager for the city, I would like to offer a couple of thoughts that are intended to help frame this afternoon's discussion. There's currently no policy in place to preserve agricultural land in South Morro Hills. Under the current zoning regulations, the area can continue to develop out with 2.5-acre parcels. The proposed plan provides a mechanism to preserve 75% of the land on parcels larger than 20 acres if those owners wish to develop out at a density higher than currently allowed. In staff's opinion, the rate of 2.5 acre subdivision in the past is not necessarily an indicator of the future. Contrary to what some have said, the county is still permitting subdivisions in the area that are reliant on septic systems. As the demand for housing continues to grow, we believe this area will witness continued growth, even under the area's existing zoning regulations. The framework being presented this evening would allow for an estimated 711 more residential units over what is allowed under the area's existing zoning. I just wanted to reiterate that because I have seen some communication that suggested this plan would result in thousands of additional units in the area, and certainly that's not the case. As noted in the staff report, any infrastructure costs associated with future development are expected to be paid for by the developers of the land that trigger such improvements, not by the area's existing homeowners or the city at large. And finally, I just wanted to mention that, as mentioned in the staff report, and as you'll hear again this afternoon, the plan was presented to the Planning Commission. I will say that staff felt very good coming away from that workshop with the Planning Commission. Although, clearly there remains work to be done on the plan, as was reflected in the comments by the Planning Commission. I think generally most of the Planning Commissioners were of the opinion that we were in the right, heading in the right direction. And I don't recall any Planning Commissioners saying that we were going in the wrong direction and need to rethink the plan. So with that, I'm going to turn the project over to Rob for a presentation. We do have various staff here and the consultants that are online and available to answer any questions that you may have moving forward. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council members. Rob Demahowski with the Planning Division, and here this afternoon to request that the City Council review the draft policy framework and provide comment on the guiding principles and key strategies that will be the basis for the preparation of the South Morro Hills Community Plan. South Morro Hills neighborhood planning area encompasses 5.4 square miles of agricultural zoned land in the northeast portion of the city and is the last remaining agricultural area. The area is well known to produce a variety of agricultural goods, including avocados, tomatoes, strawberries, cut flowers, and wholesale nursery plants. While the agricultural zone district is primarily intended for ag operations, it does allow the subdivision of parcels into 2.5 acres and developed with one single family home, as long as that home does not conflict with agricultural operations. In recent years, the South Morro Hills community has faced increased challenges to the viability of farming, including increased cost of water, labor, state regulations, and competition from the world market. There has also been increased pressure for residential development based on the limited amount of remaining greenfield land in Oceanside, the desirable location, and also the housing shortage and strong residential real estate market. And in 2011, a group of property owners requested that the City Council initiate an amendment to the Sewer, Water, and Drainage Master Plan to address infrastructure needs that could accommodate development allowed under the current zoning of 2.5 acre subdivisions. Although the effort never materialized, it did bring to light the issues faced by farmers and their desire to plan for the future of the area. In 2016, the city, in partnership with Visit Oceanside and the South Morro Hills Association, prepared an ag tourism strategic plan to promote ag tourism as a way to provide supplemental income to farmers and the goal of keeping farming viable. The effort was also to resist development of the land into the 2.5 acres, which is known as the pegboard approach. If you were to take Morro Hills and subdivide the entire area into 2.5 acres. The City Council approved the ag tourism strategic plan, received it rather on August 17th of 2016, and an ag tourism steering committee was formed to help implement the plan. The strategic plan outlined a two-tier approach. Tier 1 focused on marketing, education, and low-intensity ag tourism uses such as you-pick, farm stands, wine tasting. And Tier 2 is comprised of higher intensity uses that generally require a higher investment as well as infrastructure. And these uses can include boutique hotels, day spas, amphitheaters, and larger agricultural retail operations. And implementation of Tier 2 is being considered as part of the community plan. And then in November of 2019, the City Council directed staff to prepare the community plan. And we have partnered with Davenport consultant team, our consultant for the general plan update, to assist with the preparation of this plan. As mentioned, a community plan that focuses on important issues based for a specific area within the city and establishes detailed policies to guide future land use and development, and is incorporated by reference into the general plan. The South Morro Hills Community Plan will contain policies and planning guidance specific to Oceanside's only remaining agricultural area, with a focus on supporting the continued viability of farming and farmland conservation, expand agritourism opportunities, and to protect the rural character and enhance the quality of life of residents, as well as promote responsible growth management. Building off on public input received during the Ag Tourism Strategic Plan workshops, there were 3 workshops held, as well as meetings with stakeholders, including landowners, the Ag Tourism Steering Committee, and the Agrivision Group. Staff initiated a series of public outreach efforts in 2020 focused on the community plan. We conducted an online survey in April of 2020 and received 637 responses. The respondents were asked to identify their affiliation with South Morro Hills, such as being a farmer, a property owner, or a resident. And topics included farmland conservation, future of farming, ag tourism, infrastructure, residential development, and community character. In June of 2020, 3 panel discussions were hosted with the key stakeholders, including commercial farmers, the South Morro Hills Association members, and ag tourism proponents. During the stakeholder interviews, many participants indicated a strong desire to continue farming, but indicated that it is increasingly becoming more financially difficult to maintain farming operations, and there is concern that farming in the future may no longer be viable. And there was strong support agreement that that ag tourism can be viable, and one of the biggest impediments is the lack of infrastructure. And staff also met with representatives of the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians, which has a long-standing ancestral history in the area, to discuss the protection of cultural resources. And a brief overview of some of the survey results, ranked on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. Preserve sensitive habitat and open spaces, ranked highest. Ensure safety from natural hazards such as fires. Enhance visual quality. Improve traffic flow. Preserve neighborhood character. Preserve agricultural land. Expand commercial activity and employment. And promote a wide range of housing opportunities. The project team prepared a map atlas, which basically provided an overview of existing conditions and opportunities, as well as an evaluation of land use, such as mobility and infrastructure. A market analysis was prepared by Kaiser Marston Associates that focused a high-level overview of agriculture and ag tourism potential in the area. And overall, the report found that South Morro Hills has a long-term potential for Tier 2 ag tourism uses. And that is some of the defining factors were Oceanside's in a highly populated area, and the proximity to natural amenities and outdoor activities. The draft policy framework was prepared to inform the preparation of the community plan and includes 3 components: the description and background, a visioning statement, and guiding principles with key strategies. The draft framework includes multiple map exhibits highlighting the existing conditions. As shown on the general plan map exhibit, Morro Hills has a land use and zoning designation of agricultural, and the community plan is intended for parcels that have both a land use and zoning designation of agriculture. And it is noted at the bottom that the North River Farms project site is not included in the project scope at this time, based on the fact that a general plan amendment was approved in 2019 and effectively changed the land use from agricultural to residential, commercial, and other land use designations. The Farmland Exhibit identifies lands that are considered prime farmland and farmland of statewide importance by the California Department of Conservation. And this is based on soil conditions, slopes, and other factors that make the soil ideal for farming. A majority of the farmland in South Morro Hills is considered unique or of local importance, and as much of the farming that actually occurs in South Morro Hills does not necessarily occur on land that is designated as prime farmland. So there are many properties that are not, the soils are great, but they're not considered prime farmland. The Combined Assets Exhibit identifies features such as slopes, ridge lines, habitat, floodways, and hazards. And as shown on the exhibit, the purple hatching and brown represents the ridge lines and that exceed a slope of 30% or greater. And this exhibit is valuable for guiding future land use, preservation of ridge lines, and conservation of key assets within South Morro Hills. The first guiding principle is to maximize farmland conservation and to protect and support agricultural operations and sustainable farming. Strategy number one is to establish a right to farm ordinance, and this would be a declaration that the city supports the continued agricultural operations and also acts as an advisory to property owners that farming has impacts such as noise, dust, and odor that may conflict with living in a rural area. Strategy to conserve farmland with the best soil characteristics when feasible. So this would include if there is a potential development to evaluate the site conditions where farming is currently taking place and ensure that the best farmland is protected and continues to be farmed. Cluster housing would be allowed on parcels that are 20 acres or greater at a density of 1 dwelling unit per acre. And clustering will be limited to 25% of a parcel, with the remaining 75% remaining agriculture. So for example, a 20-acre parcel could have a 5-acre area dedicated to cluster housing with 15 acres remaining as agricultural land. And if cluster housing is proposed on a site, it would require an agricultural conservation easement or a type of deed restriction to ensure the continued use of the farmland for its intended purpose. And there would also be an establishment of a transfer of development right program in which a program would establish sending and receiving sites where sending sites could sell additional density to receiving sites. In return, the sending site would preserve the acreage for agricultural use. This exhibit identifies potential cluster locations based on topography, roadway access, and potential infrastructure. And it is purely for illustrative purposes, so these areas do not limit a property that qualifies for cluster housing or tier 2 to benefit from the plan. And cluster housing refers to development with homes situated in close groupings, surrounded by often open space as a form of buffer with adjacent agricultural uses. And lot sizes typically vary between 2,000 to 6,000 square feet. And while the proposed density is higher than is currently allowed, cluster housing has several benefits. It reduces the development footprint of housing and impacts on agricultural land. It provides cost-effective and efficient delivery of required infrastructure, and it will help fund necessary infrastructure for tier 2 ag tourism uses. And it will also provide substantial income to farmers and is an alternative to subdividing lots in the 2.5 acres for the development of single-family homes, which results in an inefficient patchwork of lots. The project team analyzed the potential number of dwelling units that could be developed at one dwelling unit per acre on qualifying parcels of 20 acres or larger. And this nets out the steepest terrain and undevelopable areas. As proposed, the community plan could potentially accommodate 1,862 dwelling units. And developable land is defined as land that has slope less than 15% and generally no environmental constraints. And partially constrained land is slopes 15 to 30%, and that is also considered developable, but for density purposes, that portion, the density would be reduced to 0.75 dwelling units per acre rather than one dwelling unit on those portions. For comparison purposes, the existing general plan land use with the 1 per 2.5 acres would allow up to 1,151 additional units under the current density on the 3,440 acres making up Morro Hills. The proposed plan will qualify with qualifying sites of 20 acres or larger and netting out undevelopable land would comprise 2,701 acres and would allow the total of 1,862. So there was previously a number that called out 2,033 units, and that would be a blanket number not taking into account these factors that would prevent development on slopes that exceed 30% and so on. And as previously mentioned, the difference between existing zoning and the proposed density would allow 711 more units under the proposed plan. The Transfer Development Right Program would establish a process where sending sites could sell development rights to the receiving site, and the receiving site could purchase these development rights in addition to the one dwelling unit per acre allowance on sites that are 20 acres or larger. And for parcels that are less than 20 acres but are between 10 and less than 20, they can be sending sites and can send density at one dwelling unit per 2.5 acres, but they cannot act as a receiving site or build the cluster housing. And for parcels 20 acres or larger, they can send density at or receive density at one dwelling unit per acre. And once a sending site transfers the development rights, an agricultural conservation easement or a deed restriction shall record against the sending site for each acre that is transferred. The second guiding principle is to strengthen community design and character to protect the scenic quality and rural character of South Morro Hills. A key strategy is to establish architectural design guidelines that fit the rural context of South Morro Hills. A strategy to preserve key landforms and ridgelines, and this would prohibit development on slopes that exceed 30% and also limit height of buildings to preserve those view sheds and ridgelines that define Morro Hills. Development would be screened from roads by setbacks and buffering as well as landscaping. And strategy would be to promote housing types to meet community and workforce needs, and housing types may include detached units or multifamily structures for workforce housing and affordable housing, but urban type development would be prohibited. So any attached structure would have design guidelines and development standards that would be form-based for Morro Hills to maintain the rural character. Guiding principle number 3 is to promote ag tourism and allow development of large-scale ag tourism businesses, including event spaces, boutique hotels, resorts, and spas, and dining establishments with the level of development linked to agricultural land protection. Strategies include to enable Tier 2 uses for larger commercial farmers. So Tier 2 uses are really intended for the true commercial farmers as a way to provide significant supplemental income to keep them farming. And as defined in the plan, the minimum size would be 20 acres or larger. Tier 2 uses, buildings associated with a use can occupy 5% of a site, and this is in addition to the 25% cluster allowance. However, a non-ag dependent use such as a boutique hotel or a structure that does not have direct ag dependence would be counted towards the 25% cluster allowance. So 20% could be allocated for cluster housing, and then 5% for the tier 2 non-ag dependent tier 2 use. And that tier 2 use would not have to be contiguous to the cluster housing. It could be located elsewhere on the property where it would be likely surrounded by the farming operation. The next strategy is to brown South Morro Hills as an agricultural visitor destination to draw on tourism, and to also coordinate with the city's hospitality sector to promote not only the beach, but tourists can also visit Morro Hills as a destination. The fourth guiding principle is to ensure efficient infrastructure, and this is to ensure sustainable development and access to adequate water supply and wastewater management systems. Key strategies include prioritize infrastructure that reduces the cost of farming, locate development that efficiently delivers new sewer service, identify infrastructure costs to determine the feasibility of potential projects, evaluate funding mechanisms on how to pay for the infrastructure. And infrastructure costs are still being refined. We are looking at strategies that will be shared as a follow-up item as the framework is refined based on the outcome of the workshop. Infrastructure will be assessed on an as-needed basis to avoid extending public facilities to areas where it is not warranted or desired. This would allow the continued use of septic systems on smaller parcels not subject to tier 2 or cluster housing provisions. The community plan will identify ways to provide the most cost-effective infrastructure and evaluate funding mechanisms to ensure residents and taxpayers are not burdened with infrastructure and maintenance costs associated with new development. And this exhibit identifies potential locations of sewer extensions, and the areas noted in black would be ideal based on it would be gravity fed, and the cost of sewer installation would be less. Going above Las Tunas, a sewer extension would require a lift station, which would increase the cost of service, but is not infeasible. The fifth guiding principle is to increase safety and access by expanding walking, biking, and transit access for both residents and visitors alike. Key strategy is to improve circulation and emergency access in the area. Many of the existing roads in the area are 2-lane and substandard compared to today's development standards. The plan would limit urban street improvements such as curb, gutter, and sidewalk. There would still be sidewalk, but it would possibly be in a design that would fit the rural character and not traditional urban style sidewalk. Strategy would include traffic calming features and buffered pedestrian paths that would increase safety for visitors and residents. And a key strategy would be to improve the existing 2-lane roads and bike lanes on 2 of the main roads. North River Road is designated as a 4-lane arterial, so there's the potential for widening that road to its potential as outlined in the circulation element, the existing circulation element. And Wilshire Road would become a 2-lane collector, and these would also have the community plan would include design standards that would allow for street widening improvements to have a rural feel, and would not be necessarily the same improvements for an urban road widening project. And finally, to consider roadway system expansions, and this includes the possibility of a linkage between Wilshire Road and Sleeping Indian Road. It would create a loop road, so if there was ag tourism, visitors could connect via a loop road. And also the evaluation of a third bridge crossing across the San Luis Rey River. The project team calculated potential infrastructure costs for the extensions of sewer, as shown on the previous exhibit. It is anticipated that water infrastructure, since there is already water in the area, would be minimal, and therefore future development is predicated on the extension of sewer. The total cost of sewer infrastructure is anticipated to be $18.2 million at a cost of $12,401 per dwelling unit. And roadway infrastructure costs are still under evaluation. It would need to take into account the proposed density, design, and development forecasted. It is anticipated that roadway improvements with the Wilshire Road and North River Road would be in the upward of $35 million, and that excludes the cost of land acquisition as well as a third bridge across the river. And road improvements could occur incrementally rather than prior to construction of a project, which would help defer costs over time. New development would be responsible for the direct costs of building new streets and other infrastructure. There are a variety of ways to finance development, and some of these include a proposal for a development impact fee, which would be in addition to the standard development impact fees paid for by a new project, there would be a supplemental impact fee specific for new Morro Hills development that would help pay for CIP projects and additional costs in the area. The second financing source is a community facilities district, also known as a Melrose, where it could establish a special property tax on real estate with the CFD selling bonds secured against the property value to generate funds for construction and maintenance of public improvements. And this includes street, water, sewage and drainage, schools, parks, and public safety. The third option would be a special assessment district. These are generally formed for undeveloped areas and are used to pay for roads and infrastructure. For this type of financing, a finding of benefit for the specific area or community at large is required. And the municipal bonds supported by special assessments are issued to provide upfront financing for infrastructure. And the fourth option is development upfront financing. And this is where a large property owner would typically front the cost of those initial sewer improvements. And as additional development came in the area, that property owner would be reimbursed through a reimbursement agreement with the city. And the sixth and final guiding principle is to prioritize natural resource and cultural resource conservation by maximizing conservation of the area's natural and cultural resources and sensitive habitat. Key strategies include to preserve wetland and riparian areas, ensure development is sensitive to endangered and threatened species, to preserve natural landforms and minimize cut and fill grading. So ideally, projects would preserve the natural land and minimize grading. And finally, to minimize impacts to cultural resources, including archaeological, paleontological, and Native American resources. And also note that additional environmental analysis will take place as part of the programmatic EIR being prepared as part of the comprehensive general plan update. This concludes the framework. For the next steps, after the workshop, staff intends to conduct additional community outreach and host design charrettes to work out the details of the design and architectural guidelines and other components of the plan. The project team will work on refining the infrastructure costs and financing strategies. And the draft community plan is anticipated to be prepared by November of 2021, and the environmental impact report will follow that. And finally, the consideration of the plan, of the community plan, would be considered with the adoption of the overall comprehensive general plan update. This concludes my presentation, and as mentioned, our consultant, Rajiv Bhatia, is on the line to answer any questions regarding the details of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to begin with the public, is that right?
Yes, we have 22 speakers.
Okay.
So our first speakers are Scott Ashton, to be followed by Cindy Davenport, to be followed by Carolyn Kramer. And Mr. Ashton, whenever you're ready.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Scott Ashton. I'm the CEO of the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank staff and the community members who participated in putting together this thoughtful approach for the future of South Morro Hills. I know that there's still work to be done, but I wanted to note that I think we're moving in the right direction. We appreciate a well-balanced approach that will allow Oceanside's farmers to adapt to the changing face of farming and to find new opportunities to reinvent their businesses in order to provide for future generations of their families. There's been talk over the years about the importance of clustering any housing that goes into South Morro Hills, as well as the importance of conserving farmland and paving the way for Tier 2 agritourism. And without a plan, we may very well end up with hundreds of homes on 2.5-acre lots with really no opportunity for a robust agritourism program. So housing is a key element to paying for the infrastructure that will be needed for a viable Tier 2 plan. And this draft plan shows that there are very creative ways to make housing, conservation, agritourism all work together to create an exciting future for this special part of Oceanside. So thank you again for the work that you're doing, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Cindy, Mrs. Davenport originally was signed on Zoom, but she is here in person, so we'll just take her in this order.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. We've heard from speakers expressing facts and some feelings. We're still early in the public speakers realm, but it seems like there hasn't been enough of an attempt to get an actual agritourism plan going, so we should give it another chance. This does affect us all in the long term. This proposed housing, clustered housing, is not needed to comply with our RHNA numbers and goals. And SB 330 specifically reads like this: the legislature also recognizes that premature and unnecessary development of agricultural lands for urban uses continues to have adverse effects on the availability of those lands for food and fiber production and on the economy of the state. Furthermore, it is the policy of the state that development should be guided away from prime agricultural lands. Therefore, in implementing this section, local jurisdictions should encourage to the maximum extent practicable infilling existing urban areas. So we know that the majority of Oceansiders believe in that concept. We also need to be aware that there is still a large danger of unsafe wildfire conditions in South Morro Hills, and development just exacerbates that. And we don't have enough water, really. We're starting another drought. We should keep that in mind. And this document, this draft plan, really does read like a developer's handbook, and we ask you to please send direction to staff to take out cluster housing and add back in agritourism, as well as open space considerations. The only way we can meet any of our goals in our climate action plan, which is part of our general plan, which this is a part of that too, is to keep farmland and open space. So we need smart development. Again and again, we say smart development, not sprawl development. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Carolyn Kramer, to be followed by Diane Nygaard, to be followed by Hannah Gabay. We're getting Mrs. Kramer on.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am really at a loss to see why this proposal is even before you to rezone Oceanside's precious farmland. An attempt to change the zoning on our farmland was overwhelmingly defeated in the November election by the people of Oceanside. 73% of the voters of Oceanside do not want farmland to change from the existing zoning. To downsize the zoning to 1 acre parcels would be the beginning of the end to farmland in Oceanside. We have plenty of examples if you just look around at what Orange County has become. We can learn from those mistakes. The people of Oceanside do not want to become Orange County South or another Mission Viejo. Please say no to any zone change and cluster housing in South Morro Hills. Just look at the rest of our city with housing built around the airport and around the railroad tracks. Residents around the airport complain about the noise of the planes, even though the airport was there long before the houses. Residents around the railroad tracks complain about the train horns. The railroad was there long before the houses were built. Agricultural farmland has its own noises and smells, as Dromboski just said. Residential housing, cluster housing, does not mix with the daily activities of functioning farmland. So, in a nutshell, we, the people of Oceanside, have spoken in November. Now it's on you as our representatives that are supposed to represent we, the people. It's your turn to say no to any zone change on agricultural farmland and say no to any cluster housing. Please preserve this very unique and special area of Oceanside. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Diane Nygaard, to be followed by Hannah Gabay, to be followed by Leslie Gall. Diane?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Diane Nygaard, representing Preserve Calavera. As Mr. Borrego said at the beginning of this presentation, the overarching goal of this plan is to preserve our farmland. That's what our community wants, and we believe that's really what you want. But this plan is not going to do that. It will not save 75% of our ag land. We believe you know that you don't save farmland by putting hundreds of houses on it. And you know that it will only make our jobs housing ratio worse, not better. And you know that sprawl development like this will make it harder and much more costly to reduce the greenhouse gases that we're obligated to do. And you also know that the taxpayers of Oceanside will end up with huge bills to operate and maintain this expanded infrastructure. So we urge you to direct staff to come back with a better plan, one that really protects the farmland and emphasizes agritourism. We submitted detailed written comments that suggested several ways to do that. There are certainly many others, but we've only got one chance to get this right, and we're all depending upon you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Hannah Gabay or Hannah Bay, to be followed by Leslie Gall, to be followed by Neil Nagata.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Hannah Bay. I am the Executive Director of the San Diego County Farm Bureau. I'm also a registered lobbyist in the city of Oceanside because I'm paid by over 1,400 farmers and agricultural businesses in the county of San Diego to help elevate the voice of local agriculture. Today, I'm here to help the public understand how challenging it is to be an economically viable agricultural operation in the county of San Diego. In the last 10 years, we've lost over 60,000 acres of farmland in our county. That's a 20% total acreage loss. Farmers struggle to remain economically viable because of the high cost of land, the high cost of water, a complex regulatory environment, and an extreme labor shortage. Farming in Oceanside is particularly difficult, primarily due to a relatively hostile group of non-farmers that continually advocate for policies that both directly and indirectly adversely impact local farms. The Farm Bureau has been slandered by these individuals. Our farmers have been slandered by these individuals, all because the farmers want to find a path forward for the future where agriculture remains viable. So I'm here today to strongly encourage you to listen to the voice of local agriculture, the farmers located in this area of the city, when it comes to making what will break their operations over the next 30 years. This is what is in front of you today, a plan that has been in the making for over a decade and driven by the legally permitted agricultural operations in the city of Oceanside, both the large and the small ones. Increasing agritourism in this area is creative and it's promising. It's a great solution for preserving and increasing agriculture. But to implement real agritourism, the infrastructure must also be provided. Roadways must be upgraded so that the existing rural roadway hazards are reduced and multimodal transit can occur to accommodate both a commercial agricultural truck and a bicycle for somebody who wants to visit an agritourism operation. On the same token, septic, the Regional Water Quality Control Board balks right now at issuing septic permits for agritourism operations. They request packaged treatment plants, which makes it uneconomically viable. Again, it is imperative that the real-life economic considerations are included in the City of Oceanside's long-term planning process. This also relates to using in your plan an economic analysis that's based on the County of Riverside, which serves as your basis of this 25-75% ratio. It's well known that the County of Riverside offers better business, commercial, residential, and certainly agricultural opportunities than the County of San Diego. If the City of Oceanside makes policy for agriculture that is driven by non-farmers, the long-term land use planning efforts, you're going to see a steep decline in production agriculture continue over the next 30 years. But if the City of Oceanside makes policy for agriculture that's crafted with the input from your actual farmers, you're going to be giving hope to your agricultural producers and an incentive to keep going.
And that's Mrs. Bay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Leslie Gall, to be followed by Neil Nagata, to be followed by Phil Johnston. Leslie, you're on.
Hi, good afternoon. Honorable Mayor Sanchez, Deputy Mayor Kime, and City Council members. My name is Leslie Gall, and I'm the CEO of Visit Oceanside. On behalf of Visit Oceanside, I wanted to express our support for the framework that will guide the community plan for South Morro Hills. I also want to thank staff for all their work in getting us to this point. Over the past several years, Visit Oceanside has been intimately involved in the process by working with stakeholders and residents of South Morro Hills on an agritourism strategic plan. This strategic plan is an important part of our mission to grow demand in the off-season by diversifying and offering unique visitor experiences year-round. We are also advocates for protecting Oceanside's unique brand personality. Farming is an important part of our culture and heritage. It helps us differentiate ourselves as a beach destination. As part of our work over the years, we facilitated the Tier 1 activities of the strategic plan in 2016. This included 3 community workshops that were met with overwhelming support from the South Morro Hills community. We averaged 70 attendees at these workshops with over 100 attendees at the first workshop. These attendees included commercial farmers, small farmers, and residents. After these workshops and multiple surveys, we heard clearly from the residents and farmers in South Morro Hills that there was the need and support community vision plan that included agritourism as a viable economic option. The majority understood the importance of working together to create a plan that provided the farmers with significant new income resources while maintaining a rural landscape and character. The framework accomplishes this goal. It is the result of years of community stakeholder input along with hours of work by city staff. It provides an important blueprint that is needed to sustain positive revenue generating opportunities for Oceanside, as well as a path for commercial farmers to sustain their way of life. A thoughtful community vision plan that is centered around economic impact can also generate significant tax dollars for a community. As one of the many examples that we've used, Temecula has implemented a community vision plan around the creation of a wine region. Temecula generates nearly $1 billion in visitor spending annually. Although we've been on a positive trajectory in Oceanside, this is double the visitor spending that we generate. As a beach community, there is no reason for not being able to create investments that spur visitor spending, generating diverse tax revenues for our local services and amenities. And our plan would be much richer, offering more varied experiences from vineyards to flowers, coffee, and more, all remaining authentic to our roots. The plan will also protect South Morro Hills for the future by giving investors a framework in which they have to follow while providing the farmers opportunities and flexibility to adapt to the changes and trends in order to stay relevant and successful. Change is inevitable. We can choose to ignore it and lose our farms by missed opportunities, or we can be proactive and manage the change. Thank you. We request that you move forward with this opportunity.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Neil Nagata, to be followed by Phil Johnston, to be followed by Barbara Collins.
Hello. Honorable Mayor and City Council, I'm Neil Nagata. I'm a third generation farmer, and my family's been in Oceanside since the 1900s. We live, farm, and own property in South Morro Hills. I want to thank the city staff and the South Morro Hills Ag-Tourism Group that has come together to develop this plan over many years. This plan was put together in many hours of work and conversations with the citizens of Oceanside. I would like to say that I'm in support of moving forward in planning the South Morro Hills, which includes agricultural tourism, economic development, and housing. Roads and infrastructure are important to the area for access and evacuation in emergencies. I am, however, concerned that the plan may not be as flexible as it needs to be, as we don't know what the future of agriculture and tourism, as well as the industrial and housing needs for the city in the next 30 years. With this being said, the framework presented today has a great deal to offer the city in economic development and structural needs for the city to prosper into the future. All the farmers I know have expressed difficulty in staying in business. This plan will assist farmers to adapt and provide multiple options to continue sustaining viable businesses. It would be a waste of time and resources if we cannot build the concept presented here today because it's not economically feasible. We need to save the farmer, not the farmland. Without the farmer, farmland is just weeds. I'm asking the City Council to consider the plan for South Morro Hills for roads, sewers, infrastructure, and the general plan amendment. I do not know when we will need to stop farming, but I believe it is in the best interest for the city to plan the future rather than an individual development projects without a general plan amendment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We don't have Phil Johnston in the room, so we're going to move on to Barbara Collins, to be followed by Patricia Torona, to be followed by Michelle Castellano-Keeler. Mrs. Collins, whenever you're ready.
Okie doke, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Sanchez and City Council members. I'm going to repeat this. It's a very important point. In November, by an overwhelming margin, over 2-1, Oceanside voters rejected the plan to develop dense housing on our farmland. The developer, at one point I think needs to be made, is how much the developer spent over $2 million to sell this dense housing project to the voters. But we all know that's a tremendous amount of money in a city the size of Oceanside. So they made their best case. And yet the voters still rejected it by 2-1 because Oceanside residents want our farmland to be preserved and protected. Now we're being told that the only way to preserve the farmland and promote agritourism is to build dense cluster housing there. It's like deja vu all over again. This area is also a dangerous location for such dense housing because of the wildfire danger. We must not place people in harm's way by building so many houses in this area. We must not ignore the 2020 election results in Oceanside. I urge you to send this plan back to be rewritten and reaffirm that Oceanside will develop in ways that enhance our way of life in the future. Reject sprawl development and keep the farmland zoned for agriculture, not cluster housing. We need to preserve our open spaces and farmland. Smart growth in areas near existing city services, jobs, schools, and public transportation. That is the way forward for Oceanside. Move forward with the smart corridor development in the heart of the city. Don't let developers profiteer on our precious farmland and place potentially thousands of people in harm's way. The election results are clear. The voters have spoken. Please don't betray the voters of Oceanside. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Patricia Torona, to be followed by Michelle Castellano-Keeler, to be followed by Margot Lowe. Patricia, whenever you're ready.
And city staff, I'm Patricia Torona, and I'm voicing my opposition to the South Morro Hills Community Plan being proposed this afternoon. Most public comments attached to the draft overwhelmingly oppose the current plan, and I go on record saying I'm in agreement with the specifics of their comments. The stated go-forward plan is to build housing in infill, already zoned residential, and along the corridors of Vista Way, Oceanside Boulevard, and Mission. This is what we recommended in our groups at the last housing plan workshop. Please listen to the citizens of Oceanside and don't open South Morro Hills up to the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Michelle Castellano-Keeler, to be followed by Margot Lowe, to be followed by Dennis Martinick. Michelle, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Oceanside City Council, and for the staff. And I'd like to thank the staff for their hard work that's taken place on the South Morro Hills Community Plan. I think after listening to a lot of the comments, I just want to remind everybody that the main reason that we've gotten here is commercial farmers in South Morro Hills have gotten to this point where it's no longer financially viable to continue farming in this area. And so those farmers started to look at their only option, and that was to cut up their farms in 2.5 acre estate home parcels, like Rob and Jonathan mentioned earlier. It is already zoned for that. So we got to this place because there was a desire to not eliminate farmland and turn it into 2.5 acre parcels. The South Morro Hills Association, the farmers in the area, neighbors in the city have worked together towards this alternative. This does allow large farmers to continue farming. And it's the reason being that if you allow the clustered housing, it brings the utilities out there, and then you have the agritourism, which the farmers need to stay out there. Otherwise, the alternative is this pegboard alternative. So when people say, oppose this plan and save farmland, the farmers are at a point where if they develop this land into 2.5 acre lots, you have essentially gotten rid of the farmland. So we just really appreciate the hard work and attention that the community plan focuses on the needs of the farmers. It's looking at the future and it's creating progress instead of being locked into the old way, which is no longer working for farmers. I believe it is a smart development. And there's been a lot of comments about fire dangers. If you think about 75% of this farmland staying as irrigated farmland, that actually is a protection from the spread of wildfires. A lot of the fires that happened through Bonsall in those areas was in estate homes where people couldn't afford to irrigate their 2.5, 5 acre areas. And that just attracted those wildfires. So I guess I just want to thank you all for your work on this. We're really proud of where this is going. It's not a perfect plan. I don't think it's finished, but it is leading us into a direction that the farmers are saying they will stay in South Morro Hills and continue to farm. And I think that's what we all want. So my sincere thanks for all of your work, and we look forward to the future of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Margot Lowe, to be followed by Dennis Martinick, to be followed by Jane Marshall. Mrs. Lowe, you're on.
Yes, first of all, the North River Farms should be included in the South Morro Hills planning. And I want to point out that the people of Oceanside have voted twice to keep South Morro Hills as farmland. In the first election, they were tricked into voting the wrong way by the slick literature sent by the developers. It's clear that they voted to save the farmland. They just voted the wrong way. In the more recent election, Oceanside voters voted 2-1 to keep the zoning as agricultural. The current proposal before the council is an attempt to do an end run around the election results. The people of Oceanside do not want more housing in the South Morro Hills area. The city can meet its housing requirements by infill, as has been discussed in the previous workshops. The people of Oceanside have spoken. The council needs to listen.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Dennis Martinick, to be followed by Jane Marshall, to be followed by Aaron Morin. Dr. Martinick, you're on. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Dennis Marnick, a 40-year resident of South Morro Hills, and one of the many community members, residents of the area that oppose changing the zoning from 2.5 to 1 acre zoning. In the beginning of this process, the South Morro Hills Community Plan had goals that were positive and beneficial to all Oceanside residents. I'd like to read that. Maintain the rural character of South Morro Hills by preserving agricultural land, creating vibrant agritourism opportunities that increase the profitability of the agricultural community and minimize conflicts between residential, agricultural, and agritourism uses. There's no mention of clusters of housing. The plan that's presented to you today does not accomplish these goals. Instead of preserving agricultural lands, it promotes development of housing projects that are inconsistent with the city's smart and sustainable corridors plan and would result in the worsening of the city's jobs to housing ratio. It would result in a loss of agricultural and agritourism jobs. This plan conflicts with agriculture and agritourism and requires unneeded sewers and roads that would be paid for by taxing Oceanside residents for the long-term cost of maintaining services and repairs to the infrastructure. Agritourism that is compatible with agriculture is a good common sense way of increasing the economic feasibility of farming. Compatible agritourism does not require sewers and 4-lane roads. People engage in agritourism to enjoy the rural agricultural character of an area. They engage in agritourism to get away from the urban chaos characterized by traffic, roads, and dense housing. Council should instruct its planners to eliminate the housing elements from this plan and reduce the infrastructure improvements to be compatible with a rural agricultural environment. Encourage agritourism, not housing development. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Jane Marshall, to be followed by Aaron Morin, to be followed by Michelle Lisi Mersey.
Good afternoon, Council, everyone here. Jane Marshall, 30-year resident. I have 5 reasons to rework the South Morro Hills Community Plan. I know that staff has spent a lot of hours and time with the consulting firm putting forth this, and the principles are really good. However, the details do not support the principle. And the other thing is the plan was rushed. It was created during this section of the agritourism phase 2 sort of South Morro Hills plan, created during the pandemic, where public input was little or none, and what didn't allow enough of the residents either to be notified and or comment on this, to have real input into it. Secondly, it's perplexing. While one side of the planning is working on smart and sustainable corridor growth that complements our climate action plan, the other side, working with this consulting group, is trying to solve the same problem with the same hammer. We can't continue to use housing as the only way to build infrastructure where infrastructure is needed. And we do need some infrastructure there, but we don't need, the taxpayers don't necessarily want to support all the other amenities or hotels and cluster housing that's going in there. And the residents, community residents, as many people voted or have during the election, that 2/3 didn't even want any development out there. This plan has a tricky and confusing formula about how many things can be built, how many cluster housing. Then you add to that there's transfer rights, which is also very confusing. And then of course the ADUs and junior ADUs that can be added on top of that. So we're talking about an immense amount of housing where now it's rural and it should be kept that way. It's contradicting. The goal of agritourism is to keep it agri, not housing. Can you imagine going to Bates Nut Farm on a 4-lane freeway? I mean, how romantic is that? Or going to a winery? We need to keep agritourism, real agritourism, and not try to subsidize it with housing. And finally, it's not what the community wants, as many, many people have already stated, and I know that many people have written in We actually polled about 100 of the South Morro Hills residents, and the majority, almost 90% that knew about this, said no on the South Morro Hills Community Plan. We need to rework it, and we encourage council to direct staff to rework this so it fits in our community instead of the developers trying to fit something into our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Aaron Marin, to be followed by Michelle Lisi Mersey, to be followed by Patty Hughes.
Honorable Mayor, council members, this is Darren Warren, 1241 Chambord Court, Oceanside. Also a family of a large landowner, Gilligan Groves. I would like to see this go back to the drawing board because Gilligan Groves was not informed about this. We were not part of this planning. And I would really, really like one of us as a large landowner and a stakeholder to be involved in this. I was when I saw the Planning Commission, I was very concerned. Because I think my father started something, and our 311-acre ranch, we do have a subdivision. It is 13 acres, and it's 2-acre parcels. And it's currently zoned in the county. It's very well planned. We have our roads. All it needs is electrical, sewer, maybe septic. But we do need to work on getting septic back into this process. A lot of people don't want to be living in a I would say the cluster housing. I understand, but we've got to look at other options here. And I am very strongly on this, and I want to be more involved, or somebody representing our family to be involved in this, please. We were left out of this process, and I felt very, very emotionally not happy. And we have a right to say what we want to see go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Michelle Lisi Mersey, to be followed by Patty Hughes, to be followed by Catherine Carbone.
Hi. Councilmember Sanchez, council members, I'm sorry, Mayor. I'm really upset at what I'm listening to. That land has a lot of issues. Let's just tell the truth. And to get to it, you have to go through a lot of issues to become part of that land. With that said, I'm going to read what I was told to read. The goal of the South Morro Hills Community Plan is to preserve agricultural lands in Oceanside. The intentions are good and they represent what the community clearly desires. But the details as described in the draft concept plan could result in exactly the opposite outcome over time. A significant loss in farmland and the rural character of this area of Oceanside as well. This will become one more area of suburban sprawl with a few small internet farms that only remind us of what could have been. There is no precedence specifically for agritourism at a parcel level as development seems to first be allocated for housing and anything left can be used for agritourism. Agritourism should be prioritized over housing as that supports agriculture and was the impetus for preserving agricultural jobs. Failure to protect agricultural lands and related jobs is not constant or consistent with the economic development element and the goal to improve our job housing ratio. The overridden concern remains, why would we ever consider allowing much more housing in this area? It is not needed to achieve the housing requirements to comply with RHNA. It is not consistent with the smart growth planning that is driving the update to the general plan. It is not consistent with local and regional efforts to reduce vehicle miles traveled and the associated greenhouse gases. It adds to our job housing imbalance. It will increase the long-term infrastructure costs for every taxpayer in Oceanside. Why would we do this? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Patty Hughes, to be followed by Catherine Carbone, to be followed by Joe Hill.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This framework report relied heavily on the results of 637 survey responses out of 175,000 Oceanside residents and was extremely limited and represented only 0.4% of the population. That number was probably influenced by COVID. Because of that, further workshops and community meetings should be held later in the year when a semblance of normal is apparent. They should be done in South Morro Hills with an invitation to all residents. Here are 2 slides showing survey results. When you look at these slides, that survey group put housing second to last on the scale of priorities and preserving agricultural farmland even higher. The Kaiser Marston report concluded that SMH has moderate potential in the near term and strong potential in the long term to develop agritourism uses. So remind us again, why are we concentrating on 1,862 houses? Let's get those restaurants, wineries, tasting rooms, high-end gardens, bed and breakfast, and other creative venues in the plan first, and stop addressing housing on farmland. Potential income to farmers from these venues can occur on 2.5 acre without any downsizing to 1 acre parcel. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Catherine Carbone, to be followed by Joe Hill, to be followed by Arlene Hammerschmidt.
Madam Mayor, honorable council members, my name is Catherine Carbone. I'm a proponent of No on L and a Fallbrook resident. I'm here to tell you that you don't need to put any housing in South Morro Hills in order to promote ag tourism. I'm going to ask you today to believe your own eyes and believe your own ears. You don't need to put any housing in South Morro Hills, clustered or not, in order to promote ag tourism. The reason Riverside County is so successful with their ag tourism is because they attracted wineries, not houses. You don't need to put any housing in South Morro Hills in order to promote ag tourism. This plan presented today looks like a developer's dream for developers, by developers, not for the residents of Oceanside. Believe your own eyes and believe your own ears. You don't need to put housing in South Morro Hills in order to promote ag tourism. This plan does not preserve the rural nature of South Morro Hills. The voters spoke up and told you in November they don't want houses on farmland. They weren't just talking about that tiny corner of North River Farms. They were telling you they don't want houses in South Morro Hills. Believe your own eyes, believe your own ears. Housing can go in smart growth areas, such as along Oceanside Boulevard. You don't need to put housing in South Morro Hills. Believe your own eyes, believe your own ears. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comments from Joe Hill, to be followed by Arlene Hammerschmidt, to be followed by Roger Davenport.
Good afternoon, honorable mayor and city council members. I want to read something out loud, and I'd like the gentleman in the front row here to correct it if I'm wrong in my extrapolation and understanding of what Rob Domowski presented earlier. I am a farmer in South Morro Hills. I have 100 acres of land. At 1 dwelling per acre, I am entitled to have 100 houses built only on the least productive 25% or 25 acres of my farm in a cluster. Plus, I can have an ADU with each house if I want, 100 of them. So now we have 200 structures. And with the new transfer of development rights rule, I learned that 4 farmers in the area with 20 acres each want to continue farming and do not want to build houses. So I can buy each of their 20 house allotments and add another 80 houses, possibly with ADUs, on my 25 acres. And now we're up to 360 housing structures, and so on and so on. I also have an additional lot next door of 100 acres. Can I do the same thing there? We've created a whole new community if we do that. No developer these days at all builds 1-story houses. They're always 2-story. Can you imagine what that looks like, even though we're going to try to hide it from the people in South Morro Hills when they drive through? I guess I just need to know if I'm reading this wrong or if I'm right on that. Okay, I guess I'm right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Arlene Hammerschmidt, to be followed by Roger Davenport.
I do have a quick question on that. Wouldn't it be 2 ADUs that could be built along with the 1 residential? Mr. Borrego? It wouldn't just be 1 ADU, it'd be 2, right? State law?
Honorable Mayor and council members, yeah, in response to that question, a junior ADU is allowed, a third unit could be allowed, but one of those units would have to be owner occupied under current state law, that's correct.
So it could be from 1 to 3?
It could be.
Okay, thank you.
I guess that's as tight as it gets. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members. Arlene Hammerschmidt, you know my bio. I respectfully asked this question. Mr. Balma, did the South Morro Hills Association vote approvals that are reflected in your shared meeting notes? If there were not votes, how was consensus arrived at? I cannot believe this plan is even really being considered. I see a core problem. This was designed, the consultant was an urban planner, not an agricultural area planner. And that is reflected in all these houses. I oppose the South Morro Hills community plan because we've already heard about the results of Measure L. 73% of the entire voting population of Oceanside has opposed converting farmland to housing last November. We want to keep, not destroy, our city's last acres of state significant agricultural resource. We want to see agritourism flourish, first and foremost. We want safety for current and future residents to be the primary concern. Any additional housing increases the danger of trying to evacuate anybody from known fire area. Housing for agricultural workers is really the only understandable housing for this area because that would actually support agriculture, not conflict with it. We want infill and safe, sustainable corridor growth that uses current infrastructure and reduces our tax burden. What you see here in this picture is what draws people to agritourism. You'll note there's not a house in view. Not one. Wide open spaces as far as you can see. It concerns me also that the majority of this planning was done during the middle of a hard COVID cover-up, basically. And a lot of people who would like to have been involved, including Gilligan Farms, may have been restricted simply because it's on Zoom. A lot of people who own property and who would like to have been included aren't tech savvy. So let's, when we're doing the hard outreach for the next phase, let's hard outreach to every landowner in South Morro Hills individually, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final public comment is from Roger Davenport.
Oh, I seldom get the last word. Roger Davenport, 541 Crouch Street. Good evening, Mayor, council members. For decades, South Morro Hills has been planned and zoned specifically for agriculture. In the 70s, according to Larry Balma, landowners applied to be included in Oceanside city limits to increase their land value and agreed to 2.5-acre lot sizes instead of the 1-acre lots they had before. I imagine the city demanded larger lots to limit the cost of infrastructure. Now, as you've heard, developing housing there is not necessary to meet any of Oceanside's housing goals, and would result in large costs to the city for infrastructure and services. So who wants this development? Answer, landowners who want to upgrade their zoning so they can further increase their land value, and developers who want to maximize profits by doing greenfield housing development. Question is, why should the residents of Oceanside subsidize this boon to those landowners and those developers while degrading a resource that we value? Since I was so surprised about the conclusion reached about cluster housing being the preferred alternative, I reread the survey report. Let me summarize. There was overwhelming support for maintaining agricultural activity as a primary use in South Morro Hills, with 74% strongly supporting versus 9% not supporting. Cluster housing was opposed by about a 2-to-1 margin. More general housing development was strongly opposed, with almost 4-to-1 against. Farmers were more strongly opposed to housing development than were other respondents. I note that the consultants presented this as, quote, relatively limited support for this idea, unquote. There was strong support, 88%, for incentives to maintain farming. Incentives to promote housing had less than 20% support. Cost of water was cited by 50% of farmers as a barrier. 25% cited local regulations, fees, and taxes, and 18% noted energy and labor issues. And almost every written comment was opposed to development of housing in South Morro Hills. In short, residents of Oceanside, including farmers, do not want more housing in South Morro Hills. Instead, they want farming to continue there, and they support incentives to help them. So I suggest, instead of promoting housing development, Oceanside should consider providing subsidized water rates to help farmers be successful, provide discount fee and tax rates for farms, reduce the energy costs for farmers and for all residents by implementing community choice energy in Oceanside, encourage farmers to build farm worker housing to attract farm workers. And these actions would address the expressed concerns of farmers and the desires of Oceansiders, rather than degrading our unique agricultural resources to profit land speculators and developers. Thank you.
And that concludes the public comment.
Thank you. Did staff want to respond to any of the comments before we go back to the council? No. Okay. Councilmember Weiss.
Thank you. And I just would like to indicate that I think the direction to staff was put the plan together and just present it to the community, which is why I think there was not a lot of community outreach and engagement throughout that initial process. What we're looking at today, as was mentioned earlier, is a framework. And from what was in the presentation by staff, there's a plan that will be coming back in November of this year. And following that, there's going to be a comprehensive environmental impact report that I suspect will take at least a year, if not longer. So we are at least probably 2 years away from having a comprehensive analysis of what it is we're even talking about in any detail. I would hope that when we do the EIR, that at least one of the alternatives that's looked at is the development of Morro Hills as it is currently zoned for 2.5-acre lots. Essentially, we'd be creating the Rancho Santa Fe of the North. And to me, that does nothing to actually preserve commercial farming. Under the current 2.5-acre lots, another 1,200 units can be built. And I know that's just gross numbers, but that is also going to require new infrastructure. And if you look at the sewer exhibit, whether you build 18 or 1,200, you're going to be adding sewers in order to sustain those additional 1,200 units. And in my opinion, it also seriously limits the future of agritourism and commercial agriculture to split all of Morro Hills up into 2.5-acre lots. In fact, at one of the South Morro Hills community events, it's probably 2 years ago now, there was an exhibit that showed what 2.5-acre lots would look like, and I don't believe anyone would actually like to see that happen. Someday, there's going to be more housing in South Morro Hills. It's coming. Whether it's 2.5-acre lots or something along the lines of what this framework put together, I believe the framework does more to preserve ag land than 2.5-acre estate lots throughout all of South Morro Hills. And I would also add, as the plan is developed, I would like to take into account the more detailed economic realities and make sure there is some flexibility in the plan as we go forward and come to some point where we may or may not accept the plan as it comes forward. I have a couple concerns. One of them is the transfer of development rights. I am going to reserve judgment on my comments until we actually see what that means, but I do have serious concerns of the example Mr. Hill used of me being able to sell off portions of my property to increase the density beyond what we are contemplating. I've got a concern of what clustering actually means. What I don't want to see in South Morro Hills is a Rancho Del Oro neighborhood offset by a large number of open space. To me, that is not in keeping with the rural nature of that area. And I also have a concern about the road network. I've got a serious concern about widening North River Road to 4 lanes. I think there does need to be some roadway improvements, which include bicycle abilities, but to create, collector streets and arterials in that area, to me, does not provide any significant benefit. The other thing I'll say is we have received a number of emails and comments that were made here today to do nothing, to keep farming. I would say this to the people that are interested, because we heard from several of the farmers that long-term farming is not going to be viable. If you believe that it is, I would say you put a business plan together and approach the farmers and buy the property. That is one way that you can control the long-term outcome of what's out there. But in the absence of that, you're going to get more houses out there over the next 30 years. It's just a matter of you're going to get estate housing or you're going to get something that balances the overall needs of the farms, the farmers, and long-term agriculture.
Deputy Mayor Kime.
Just my general thoughts on housing and our general plan coming up. I don't want South Morro Hills to look like RDO either. And I don't want RDO or Fire Mountain to look like downtown with the density. And I think as a city or as a state, we're going to have some serious challenges as it relates to local control. If you've been paying attention the last couple of years, it first started with SB 50 with Senator Scott Wiener, where he, just last week, he said, and I quote unquote, until California gets it together and starts to massively build new housing, we'll continue to see these inflated, unsustainable housing costs. To support SB 9, I disagree with that, and I have serious concerns. Just this year, you're seeing SB 9 put forward by Senate President Tony Atkins, which is going to let you build a duplex in single-family zoning, which concerns me. All of these are taking away local decisions and taking them in Sacramento. And so if you look at our RENA numbers, one of the comments that Ms. Nygaard made in her statements was, our understanding of this is there's no need for any conversion of agricultural land to achieve required RENA housing units. And I don't think we know yet, but that's the concern right now with our 55 or 5,400 RENA units. We have credits for 2,851, but the remaining, we're 1,150 short with our current zoning. So 1,150 units are going to have to come from zoning changes, and so that concerns me as well, which is I think, and these are things we all have to become involved in at the state and argue for more local control and for us to make these decisions, because I think one of the most important things we need to do in the city is preserve our neighborhoods and our planning, essentially similar to what it was as we go forward. But that's going to be a challenge, and we're going to keep seeing this every year as different bills that are trying to change single-family zoning. The American Jobs Plan that came out specifically said, for decades, exclusionary zoning laws, like minimum lot sizes, mandatory parking requirements, and prohibitions on multifamily housing have inflated housing costs. So now, not only in California, but the federal government, we're seeing pressure to change these, and we need to be proactive, plan the city the way we want it to be. If we want to preserve the character of Morro Hills, we need to have a proactive plan in place, because we're going to have future state mandates. And so that's why, this is going to be important for this plan to be in conjunction with the general plan as we have more clarity on what's going to come down from the state. Again, for what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue to advocate for local control, and for us to make those decisions together. So, thank you.
Thank you. I want to say that while I very much appreciate staff's principles, especially with respect to preserving farmland as the beginning and hopefully the highest priority, I don't believe that the conversations after that really reflect that. Let me just, buzzing, sorry. When we first started off with this, maybe 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, as a council member, I was also serving on the Coastal Commission, and we were actually reviewing large parcels of land that were actually included with the coast that was farmland. And so we were also presented with situations on, well, how do you keep farmland from going forward? How do you preserve farmland? Because there is that economic situation. And so that is where I came up with agritourism and brought it back to our city and said, hey, we need to work with the farmers to come up with agritourism and other ways to make farming viable. And the whole idea was to preserve our farmland. Forever, this city and city staff and city management has said, no, we are not going to touch the zoning in South Morro Hills. I mean, when I came on the council, there was just no way in heck that was ever going to be considered. So we started down the road of agritourism, but somehow or other, the process stopped. And then another thing came up, and that was, well, the farmers don't want to farm anymore, so they want to upzone their land. And basically, it's so that they can make more money. I am very, very grateful for the farmers that came in the 30s, 40s, 50s, came and bought land out in the middle of nowhere for pennies on the dollar and did this really phenomenal dream and basically created so much for the city of Oceanside and the county in terms of the production that they did, this commercial production at a very, very big level. So they have been making millions and millions of dollars off of that. And we have, as a city, been very fortunate to be able to be diversified in our economy. That really, really helped. But 20 years ago, we realized, we need to come out of this military kind of economy and do something bigger. And so we decided to go into tourism. We need to continue to reinvent ourselves and grow our economic base. But the one thing is very, very clear. We do not need residential development in South Morro Hills. We never have. For our economic interests, and this is for the city of Oceanside, not for current owners, because land gets transferred and transferred, we need to think about what is best for the citizens of Oceanside, for the city of Oceanside, to become that, to be economically and environmentally sustainable. Our jobs to residents ratio is the worst in the county. What we need in Oceanside are jobs. The city of Oceanside, the development department went ahead and did an independent study on whether or not we needed South Morro Hills for residential development. And the result was, no, we don't. By 2050, we will still not need South Morro Hills for residential development. What we will need is land, industrially zoned land, because we will need more jobs to be here in Oceanside. That is what was concluded by this independent study that the city requested. Now, we have had a change in city management, and all of a sudden we went from not being together in terms of resisting this pressure from the developer community to build housing in South Morro Hills. And all of a sudden now staff was, going along with the program. But the voters of this city, just in November, turned North River Farms away by a 2-to-1 margin. I think it's very, very clear that the citizens of Oceanside care more about what's best for the citizens of Oceanside and for the city of Oceanside, and said no. I am very concerned that we are continuing down this road, even though it's very clear that the voters said no. I know that the Luceños, for example, the cultural resources out there, and this is something that is very near and dear to my heart, the Sleeping Indian. I know you all know it, know the legend and see the Sleeping Indian, but you know what? That is only one of many stories and cultural resources that are there. And I really feel like that is something that needs to be incorporated more. The biggest issue that I have really is you can't stop housing once you allow it. That's the bottom line. I think Mr. Hill was trying to make a point of saying, well, don't you have to allow ADUs? Well, the truth was it goes from 1 to double to almost triple the amount of housing that would be out there if you have people willing to live there for whatever short period of time to make that be able to happen. And that is my concern, that this is not, this plan has been presented to us, doesn't really take into consideration that this should be done, if anything is to be done, it should be well buffered and only on the edge. And I don't see that happening here. I see for someone to be able to do, have 20 acres and then transfer and get another, if somebody has 15, add another 5, and then do all these transfers and, we probably will be sued once we allow one developer to build versus another developer. And these are legal fees that the citizens will have to pay in taxes. I think that we do not need to let residential development in. What we need to do is do exactly what the citizens want us to do, and that is to make preservation of farmland, of ag, which, by the way, the state will not touch. The state will not touch and make us build housing on farms. But once we go down this trickery and slippery slope, then it is going to be pressure and pressure and more pressure on 5 people. And it only takes 3 votes. 3 votes, and the whole South Morro Hills can become residential. I don't want to see another referendum. I really think that it's critical for us to be more in tune with the public and have exactly what was addressed. This process was done during a pandemic, and we should be doing a lot more, of going to the community and seeing what we can do, what minimal amount of infrastructure would be required to support that agritourism. I don't want us to be Temecula. All those farms that are there, that's decorative. They actually import their wines and import their grapes from other places that's not really true farmland anymore. Do we really want to see that kind of traffic in Oceanside? I mean, it can't even be supported. So I would really like to, I don't want to say go back to the drawing board, but really I would like staff to really listen and try much harder. I know that you can do this. I know that you can be creative. This is something that is for us unique, to be able to say we have agritourism and we have tourism, and we have a beach. I mean, to go from farmland to the beach, we have that special place already. Councilmember Jensen.
I think it's important to keep in mind that this is just framework, and this is just the outline of what's to come. But I think that this also does a better job at protecting the farmland. I think there's deed restrictions here that protect it, whereas as it stands now with 2.5 acre lots and the pegboard development that can be allowed, I think that to me is a far worse proposition for that land than this policy that we've seen here today. And going forward, I think that there's a lot of room for community input. This is just a draft, it's just framework. There's going to be a lot of time for input. And I think that we should go forward with this because it protects the land better than it's protected right now.
Thank you. And the last thing, I forgot to add that the county and the state are moving away from allowing development in outlying areas, precisely because of the drought situation and also for wildfires. Excuse me. So I guess that's the direction that we've given to staff. And next on the agenda is our public communications on city council matters on off-agenda items. Do we have any requests to speak, Mr. Navarro?
Yes, we do. We have 2 requests to speak. Our first public comment is from Joe Hill, to be followed by Cindy Davenport.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I don't have anything written down, but I did see something in the newspaper the other day that kind of got my attention. And I'm wondering why or what process that Oceanside has in place to actually attract businesses to our city. It seems like we have a difficult time doing that. It seems like that's part of our problems with housing and workforce. The item that I'm talking about is the city of Chula Vista is unhappy and angry and doesn't want a 29-acre parcel of land to have an Amazon warehouse on it. I mean, that's about 1,000 jobs, but why can't a city like Oceanside attract that attention? I mean, it's probably better for us, better for them up here than it is down in San Diego, but maybe I'm wrong. I think the Chamber of Commerce, unfortunately, is keyed in and really focused on development, and they have been for a while. I mean, the fact that we have a paid lobbyist on the executive board of the Chamber of Commerce that lobbies for development, that's terrible, but that's the way it is, and I don't know how we fix that. But why can't we attract more large business buildings like warehouses and for Oceanside? I guess that's my comment. I think we're really deficit. That's a deficit in our operation, and I think the city council should encourage the Chamber of Commerce to go out and look for things like that, rather than always thinking about let's build houses, let's do this, let's do that. Let's get some businesses in our city and have more jobs for our people. Thank you.
Our next public comment's from Cindy Davenport.
Honorable Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, this is a notice of intention to circulate recall pursuant to section 11020 California Elections Code. The undersigned registered qualified voters of the City of Oceanside, District 1 in the state of California, hereby give notice that we are the proponents of a recall petition and that we intend to seek your recall and removal from the office of City Council Member for District 1 in the city of Oceanside, California, and to demand election of a successor in that office.
And that concludes the public comment.
Thank you. So we're going to adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is next Wednesday, May 5th, 2021 at 3:30 for a closed session. Meeting adjourned.